3 days trying to do the PowerPoint for this, and you'll see why. I'm not a TV producer. I'm not a cartoonist. I'm not even very proficient in PowerPoint. You're going to see there's a lot that I've tried to make it easy for you to process because there's so many words in Daniel. There's 3 or 4 things going on in every verse. And so I'm going to try to put pictures with it so you can kind of see as we talk. But by no means do I expect you to memorize all this. This is some tough stuff. So I'm giving this to you, but I'm going to make it to them as if they're dumb if they don't get it right away. All right, good evening, and welcome to Loris First Baptist Church, where we've come to do our Daniel Bible study tonight. We're in lesson number 19, and it covers Daniel chapter 11. And as I was saying to our group here, that Daniel 11 is considered the most significant detailed prophecy in all the Bible. And it was so attacked by liberals in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century because they truly believed there were so many details that matched history exactly that they figured that it was by no means prophecy, that it actually was Jewish history, and it was inserted into the Jewish canon just to encourage them after Rome had destroyed Israel in 70 A.D. And so they believed that it was just a way to encourage the Jewish people that their God was watching over them. But when the Dead Sea Scrolls was found in 1948, we know that there was a book of Daniel with chapter 11 in it, which dated to 200 B.C. So there's no way this could be a 200 A.D. prophecy. And there's so many details in here. I tried to do a PowerPoint to kind of help you along. If I'm going too fast, raise your hand, and if I see you, I may slow down. All right, here goes. Now then I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will appear in Persia, and then a 4th who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will appear who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power. After some years, they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days, she will be handed over together with her royal escort and her father and the one who supported her. One from her family line will arise to take her place. He will attack the forces of the king of the north and enter his fortress. He will fight against them and be victorious. He will also seize their gods, their metal images, their valuable articles of silver and gold, and carry them off to Egypt. For some years he will leave the king of the north alone. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, but will not retreat to his own country. His sons will prepare for war and assemble a great army, which will sweep on like an irresistible flood and carry the battle as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south will march out in a rage and fight against the king of the north, who will raise a large army, but it will be defeated. When the army is carried off, the king of the south will be filled with pride and will slaughter many thousands. Yet he will not remain triumphant. For the king of the north will muster another army, larger than the first, and after several years he will advance with a huge army fully equipped. In those times many will arise against the king of the south. The violent men among your own people will rebel in fulfillment of the vision, but without success. Then the king of the north will come and build up siege ramps and will capture a fortified city. The forces of the south will be powerless to resist. Even their best troops will not have the strength to stand. The invader will do as he pleases. No one will be able to stand against him. He will establish himself in the beautiful land and will have the power to destroy it. He will determine to come with the might of his entire kingdom, and he will make an alliance with the king of the south, and he will give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom, but his plans will not succeed or help him. Then he will turn his attention to the coastlands and will take many of them. But a commander will put an end to his insolence and will turn his insolence back upon him. After this, he will turn back towards his fortress of his own country, but will stumble and fall to be seen no more. His successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor. In a few years, however, he will be destroyed, yet not in anger or in battle. He will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honor of royalty. He will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. Both it and the prince of the covenant will be destroyed. Now, I know most of this is self-evident and doesn't need to be talked about or explained, right? These are one of those chapters, if you have a hard time going to sleep, you take it, line it up next to your bed, and start reading it, and before long, it'll probably put you out. There is so much in this, and that's, of course, why Daniel was so troubled. Daniel, of course, was praying because he was really concerned about something in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. See, he was given this revelation. Its message was true, and what we dated this as 3rd year of Cyrus would be around 536 BC when he got this vision. And this is the 4th vision. Now, the best way, there's some things in here that when I start talking, you go, didn't we talk about that before? Yes. These 4 visions, it's like you're way up in the air, and Daniel is seeing some things, but not too clearly. That's the first vision. Then he gets in and starts getting a little bit of details, and it keeps going and going until we get to this 4th vision where there's a lot of details given. So it's like an airplane coming over a forest, and you're getting all the way down to the little trees. Now, why was Daniel praying and asking for God's revelation? Well, in 538 BC, just 1 year after King Cyrus had taken, the Persian king had taken over Babylon, he allowed all the Israelites that wanted to go back and rebuild the temple for God. And so he appointed Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, and he appointed Joshua. Well, Joshua was the high priest of the people, but they were allowed to go back as king and the high priest. And under this edict, over 50,000 Jewish exiles returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, and you can read about that in Ezra chapter 2. Now, they arrived in around 537 BC, and they were so excited when they got back. They got to work, but there were so many of the surrounding nations that found out what they were doing, and they didn't want this temple built, and so there was all kinds of obstruction. Finally, in 536 BC, the temple building stopped. And that 536 BC, I'm sure Daniel got news. And you remember, he lived all of his life from the time he was a young teenager all the way till he was an old man, being faithful to the Lord. And I'm sure he was so excited that he was going to live long enough for the fulfillment of the temple to be rebuilt. Now he's being told that the Jewish people have stopped, and many of them are not working on the temple. They're building homes and going on about their life, and they're not literally worshiping God. And that concerned him. He's now, well, what's going to happen to the Jewish people? What are going to happen to my people that they're rebelling against God and not fulfilling their obligation to build this temple? That's what he's praying about. And then he gets this vision. He gets this vision, and this makes it even worse for him when he actually sees what's about to happen to his people. And that's the 4th vision of Daniel. Like I said, in Daniel chapter 7, that's the first vision, and that is the big picture view of all the different empires, starting from the time of the Babylonian kingdom that Daniel was a part of, to the Persian kingdom, to the kingdom of Greece that destroyed Persia, and then the Roman Empire, and all the way to the Antichrist. So in chapter 7, we get a big, gigantic bird's eye view. But in chapter 8, we began to get a little bit closer to things, and we saw some details between the ram being the Persian Empire and the goat, the shaggy goat with the prominent horn, being the Greece Empire, the Empire of Greece. And that was the second vision. Now, this third vision, we got some details mainly about the end times, what was going to happen in the end times. based on the overall time clock of the 70 years of Daniel, and how at the end of these 70 years of time frame for the Jews, from the 7 sevens to rebuild the temple, the 63 sevens to the time Jesus Christ would come to Jerusalem, the Messiah, he would be cut off, the clock is stopped. And we know there's one more 7-year period that we're still waiting on, which is the tribulation period. Well, we got that in the third vision. But now we're going to get this fourth vision, and Daniel is looking at what's going on in the land of Israel over a 500-year period. From the time of he's living, God is going to show him everything that's going to take place almost up until the time that the Messiah comes. Then, near the end of the chapter, he shows them the last 7 years of what's going to be taking place. And there's 5 kings that this is all centered around. And it's designed for a pastor because they all have names that start with A, so it works out really well. So this angel of the Lord, which we think could very well be the Son of God, the angel of the Lord prior to him becoming incarnate, or it could be just a mighty angel prince of the Lord, is giving Daniel these details, and these are the details that make Daniel sick to his stomach and make it to where he's so weak he can barely even stand up. Because it's a message was true, and it's concerning a great war. So I've entitled this thing, we're covering only the first 22 verses, but here in chapter 11, we're going to call it Wars and Rumor of Wars. Wars and Rumor of Wars. Now you got to remember, from Daniel's standpoint, he thought once the Babylonians had been conquered and the Persian King Cyrus had taken over, that since Cyrus had a heart for the Jewish people and let them go back, that was it. The Jewish people were going to be able to return back to God. They had learned their lesson. Israel was going to be blessed and would become a mighty nation again, and there'd be no more wars. Instead, God showed him, oh no, it's not even close. So let's kind of get a summary of Daniel's chapter 11 message. King number 1 that's going to be talked about is King Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. And you know about him, whether you know it or not, you're going to know about him when I start getting into some details. Maybe you go, oh, I didn't know that's who it is, but this is a king that you should know a lot about. Now then, I tell you the truth, Daniel's told 3 more kings will appear in Persia. Now that is giving Daniel a reference. He's telling Daniel the truth. 3 more kings. Well, what king was Daniel currently serving under? Was King Cyrus. And he served from 539 to 530 BC, and he was replaced by his son Cambyses. And then there was Pseudo-Smyrtus, 522 BC. Pseudo means false, and there's a lot of history in here I don't want to get into, but he was not the real son of Cambyses. The real son of Cambyses was killed. The real Smyrtus was killed, and this guy pretended to be the son because he was located in a whole different area where people didn't even know who the son of Cambyses was, so he claimed to be Smyrtus, but he really wasn't. But Darius knew about it and ended up killing him and those that had been a part of this conspiracy, and so Smyrtus only served for just a few months of 1 year in 522, and then Darius, and this is not Darius that Daniel was thrown in the lion den with. This is a different Darius. It's Hystaspas. Now, so those are the 3 kings, and he says, and then a 4th who will be far richer. So it's like he just said there's 3 kings, but now you got to pay attention to this 4th one is important. 4th will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. So we're looking at this 4th one. Now, I don't know how many of you were here or paid attention when I was teaching about Esther. I think I did this a lot at nights back when I first came here. But I called it For Such a Time as This because, of course, Esther played a role in saving the Jewish people under this 4th king. So it's the book of Esther that you should know something about King Ahasuerus, because this is the Persian Empire, And I want you to show you, I'm showing you where Israel is located. You know, the land of Israel and Palestine is located there, and that's significant for what we're about to see, is Darius Hystaspes. It was that third king that was told, and you need to know what he did that leads up to what the fourth king is concentrating on in the book of Esther. See, in 490 BC, Darius invaded Greece. Now, why did they do that? Well, in 519 BC, the Persians conquered a group of people who lived in Asia Minor called the Ionian Greeks. Now, in 499 BC, just 20 years later, the Ionian Greeks asked the mainland Greeks to help them rebel against the Persians. And so Athens sent warships to help them, but they were not strong enough to defeat the Persian army. They got into a battle, but the Persians actually won. But it made the Persian king Darius Hystaspes mad, very angry with Greece that they attacked. So he gets real upset and said they're going to pay for this. So he amasses an army and 600 warships, and they go up against, and of course most of you that studied history, you know, the world history and ancient history have heard about all this, but basically Darius sends these ships and he takes off for Greece, and the Persian army landed at Marathon. And you know, you've heard of marathons, but this is the actual background behind his Marathon north of Athens, 490 BC. Now the Persians greatly outnumber the Greeks. They came with millions of men, and the Greeks only had thousands, but the Persians were amazed at the strong will of the small Athenian force, and they had no horses or archers. They only had fierce foot soldiers. And after a few days, the Persians decided to attack Athens by sea. But while they were loading their ships, the Athenians attacked and defeated them, and the Persians retreated. And so Athens was preparing for war, knowing that Marathon would probably get overrun and destroyed by the Persians. But the Greeks at Marathon were able to hold on, so they sent a runner. The Greeks sent their fastest runner, and it's Phidippides, to carry home news of the victory. And he sprinted 26.2 miles from the battle site to the city-state of Athens, and he arrived and said, "Rejoice, we conquer," and he died from exhaustion. And of course, that's what the marathon race is now named after, you know, and why it's 26.2 miles. Because it became an important part in Greek culture and the Olympics that they were doing. Now, so that was what Darius did. He invaded, but he got defeated by a small. He thought he was going to wipe Greece off the map, but instead he came home humiliated. But he made a vow saying that he was going to return with a larger army, more prepared. He wouldn't take them for granted the next time, and he would wipe them out. But he died before he could do that. And his son was King Ahasuerus, who is known as Xerxes the First. And you'll see him in Ezra, and he's in Esther. This is what the movie Esther, you know, had King Ahasuerus in it, Xerxes. Well, he vowed, this is that fourth king, he vowed to avenge his father's defeat by Greece. And so he called all of his satraps and successful business merchants to Susa to convince them of a need to invade Greece. He told them, you know, if we go up there, we can take everything they got, we'll all get rich, and we'll get rid of these pesky terrorists that attack us every once in a while. And so now pay attention to the beginning chapter of Esther, chapter 1, and maybe you can see something that you may have not noticed before. Look what it says. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush, you know, the Persian Empire. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. You know, we've talked about Susa before. You can go there and see the ancient ruins now, but it was a major metropolis city, but there was a big, gigantic summer castle there for the king. And it had a banquet hall that could have thousands of guests to be there, and that's what he did. He was throwing this big banquet. Now, why? It was in the third year of his reign. He gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes, and the nobles of the provinces were present. What he's trying to do is get them all drunk and just throw lavish wealth at them and women and just let them have good. And then he's going to try and convince them to go up and fight against Greece. And look what it says. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. So look, let's go back to verse 2, and it says 3 kings will appear. That third one, of course, was Darius, who got defeated by Greece, comes back. His son now has got so much money. Look what it says. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir everyone up against the kingdom of Greece. That's what's going on in chapter 1 of Esther. He's trying to get them to go to war. And so he ends up getting an army of 3 million to go up, and they stage up here in Lydia at a place called Sardis, the army, a 3 million man army and over 1,000 ships off the coast there of Turkey, and they then went to attack. And basically they went around Thrace and Macedonia and Thessaly, and they were coming down to the city-states of Greece, and they were going to wipe them off the map. Instead, they got defeated in 2 major battles, which, of course, you probably read in history. And so in 479 BC, he comes back a loser, and that's in chapter 2. That's when he decides, I need to find a wife. I got rid of my first one before the war. I need somebody to bring comfort to me. Now, because he did this in Greece, and on their way back, there in the history book, it talks about they were humiliated by the Greeks, but what they did do is on their way back, they burned down all kinds of small villages, and they raped and killed and did. And so the Greeks never forgot it, and they said, one day we'll get revenge, and that comes in Alexander the Great. So in verse 3 of Daniel, it says, then a mighty king will appear, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. Now, we covered some of this when we talked in chapter 8 about the shaggy goat with a prominent horn slamming into the ram, which is Persia. And, of course, that's Alexander the Great. And in chapter 8 said that shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. And we know Alexander the Great, in 336, decided to march against Persia, and he conquered most of Persia in 3 years. But he had the entire known world in that area under his control by 323 BC in just 13 years. And so he's that great king that does as he pleases. I mean, he never lost a battle, never lost a war. Every American general, every person that is a military officer that's involved with infantry fighting, they study Alexander the Great and his techniques. Because of his abilities to win every battle. But look what it says. After he has appeared, here we are in verse, his empire will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised. It's saying the empire was great, and then all of a sudden it lost a lot of its power because it was uprooted and given to others. Of course, Alexander the Great died soon after conquering the world from alcohol poisoning and syphilis. And when he died, he only had a mentally handicapped brother. He had a illegitimate son, and he had a young wife who was pregnant. And right after he died, they were immediately murdered, all of them. And that's why it says the empire was broken up towards the 4 winds of heaven, and really 4 of his strongest generals split everything up. Now, there's 4 of them, and there's a lot of history in all of them, but really, Daniel 11 only covers mainly the king of the north and the king of the south, and I'll tell you why. Because, remember, the messenger's talking to Daniel about what's going to happen to his people, the Jewish people, and there's a big concern in Daniel's heart because he sees what's going on between the king of the south, which is Ptolemy the First. He was the general that got Egypt and Palestine and Jerusalem, all that area, as well as northern Africa. And the other major figure is the king of the north, which is the Seleucid Empire. And they're going to have a lot of wars. We're going to go through some of them here together as much as we can tonight. They're battling back and forth with one another, And guess what land they're trampling over as they have wars? They're trampling right over Israel. And so they go back and forth through the valley of Armageddon, back and forth fighting with one another. And remember, armies get hungry, armies get thirsty, army soldiers start getting wild and thinking about women. And guess what's all around them? Resources. And so they just steal and kill and rape and pillage while they're fighting one another. And Daniel's seeing all this take place, and that's what just tears his heart out. And so in verse 5 it says, the king of the south will become strong. Now that king of the south was Ptolemy the first, Soter, S-O-T-E-R, Ptolemy Soter. And it says, but one of his commanders. Now when it said one of his commanders, before we go any further, the king of the north was, of course, Seleucus. And his full name was Seleucus the First, or Nicator. And when he first took over, there was a rebellion amongst some of the officers in his camp, and they tried to assassinate him. And so he actually escaped and went down to Egypt and started fighting with Ptolemy the First to help him establish his empire. And so it says, but one of his commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule his own kingdom with great power. He became such a mighty warrior down here that a lot of Ptolemy's troops began to follow him, and they ended up going up and overthrowing the rebels of the Seleucid Empire, and he took it back over and became the king, and that's the king of Syria, which is Seleucid the First. Now, after some years, they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south, that's not really his daughter. When the Bible says daughter, it's just because the Hebrew does not have, like we have granddaughter, great-granddaughter. Anybody that's a descendant is called a daughter or a son. Well, Bernice is Ptolemy the First's granddaughter. So the daughter of the king of the south, this is his granddaughter, will go to the king of the north to make an alliance. Now, that's Antiochus Theos is the grandson of Seleucid the First. And so she goes up and they get married. But look what it says. But she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. The idea was they would form a united kingdom, but they forgot to ask somebody what they thought about it, which is Antiochus Theos' first wife, who he had to divorce in order to marry Bernice. Now, she was beautiful, but she was 24 years older than Bernice. Bernice was a young teenage girl, and so she didn't like her husband marrying a younger, prettier girl, and so she had them both assassinated and killed. Now, this is all history that you can find in Herodotus and Justin and several other major history books, but she kills those two. So that's what it says. In those days she will be handed over together with a royal escort and her father and the one who supported her. So they were all killed. And Seleucus II comes to the throne and marries Laodicea's daughter. So one of her family line will arise to take. So who's the her? Bernice. One of her family, which is Ptolemy III. When he finds out what happened, what he does is he attacks the forces of the king of the north, and that was in 246 BC. He will fight against them and be victorious. And guess what? One of the first things he has done, he makes sure Laodicea is killed, and she is, and all those that helped her are rooted out. And so he goes up, Ptolemy actually goes up, and it says he will also seize their gods, 2,500 idols. Now these idols are major statues made of all kinds of, precious metals and things. It says they're metal images, they're valuable articles of silver. The history books say about 40,000 talents of silver, 4,000 talents of gold, and he carries them off to Egypt. So he's taken most of their wealth, and he goes back down to Egypt. And for some years, he will leave the king of the north alone. Now remember, on his way up, what did he have to go through? The land of Israel. And where did he come back through? Through the land of Israel. And then guess what happens? The king of the north decides to invade the realm of the king of the south. And that was in 240 BC. So just imagine if you're living in a village and you're just saying, goodness gracious, we're just now recovering from when Ptolemy and all of his marauders went back through. Now we've got the Seleucids coming to attack, and they're using all of our resources on their way down. So he invades and he attacks the king of the south, but he gets defeated and he retreats back in their white flag back to his own country. So from the time of Alexander the Great, the great Greek empire, he's showing you now that they get split up, uprooted. They're fighting with one another. They're getting weaker and weaker. But in the meantime, they're trampling over the top of Israel. But nobody does it more than the third and fourth king, which is Antiochus the Great, the third king. Now, Seleucus the second, of course, he ends up losing his battles with Ptolemy, but he has two sons. And the Bible says his sons will prepare for war and assemble a great army. So you have Seleucus Ceraunus. It's Ceraunus is the oldest son, but he has a younger son called Antiochus the Great, or Antiochus the Third. Now they're preparing for war, and they amass an army of 75,000 foot soldiers and 123 elephants. Just something for you to know. And they march. Now that seems insignificant, but how would you like 123 elephants to go through Loris on its way somewhere, down to Georgia from North Carolina? That's what's going on. 75,000 men marching from North Carolina, heading towards Georgia, coming through South Carolina. They don't travel at 50, 60 miles an hour. They go a little bit, and so what do the elephants need? What do the elephants do? What do the 75,000, all the way down there? They sweep on like an irresistible flood. These are specific language to show that they are going down, carrying the battle as far as his fortress. So that's 223 BC. They're heading down to the south to fight Ptolemy, and they get as far as Palestine. But the king of the south will march out in rage and fight against the king of the north. Now this is Ptolemus Philopator, and he is just a ruthless king and dictator and warrior. And so he raises a large army. He has 73,000 soldiers, so you think he's outnumbered, but he has 10,000 archers. He has 5,000 cavalrymen on horses. And he has 73 large African elephants. The ones that the Seleucids were using were small Syrian elephants. May sound insignificant, but it was like when the Germans showed up with their major tanks, and we realized in America that our little tanks couldn't come close to theirs. That's what they were dealing with. And so it says he will raise, the king of the north raised a large army, but they get defeated. And when the army is carried off, Philopator, from the south, the king of the south, he ends up taking 10,000 of Antiochus the Great soldier hostage, and he takes them down to Egypt, and it says slaughters many thousand. They come up with all kinds of inventive ways and games, and they kill those 10,000 men in very horrible manner. But yet he will not remain triumphant. Nobody's exactly sure what killed him, but some believe he was just so wicked God took him out because he loved to just torture people. So he dies in 204 BC. And this said the king of the north will muster another army larger than the first. So when Antiochus the Great finds out that Philopator is dead, he musters another large army larger than the first, and after several years, he will advance with a huge army. Now, where did he muster this army? Well, he actually went into Israel, and he ended up taking a lot of Jewish men and forcing them into his army. And he also took gold from the temple, gold from and taxes from the people. He really rebuilt his army by just completely overwhelming and conquering Israel. And after 7 years, he will advance with a huge army, fully equipped. And so in 203 BC, he is now attacking. By this time, of course, Ptolemy, that empire ruled all the way up to Syria. And if you know, right above Israel is Lebanon. And it says here, in those times many will rise against the king of the south. The violent men from among your own people will rebel in fulfillment of the vision. Meaning a lot of the Israelites join in with Antiochus the Great's army. Some were forced, some willingly joined in because they thought that would cause Antiochus to be favorable towards them, but it ends up not working out that way. Ptolemy Epiphanes is the king now of Egypt, and he has Egypt, he has Palestine, he has Jerusalem, and he also has Lebanon. And so when the Antiochus starts coming down, one of the first things he does is he comes up against siege ramps and will capture a fortified city. And you can go here, and when you go on Israel tours and stuff, sometimes they take you to the city of Sidon, which is just north of the current Israeli border. And that was a major castle that was the Egyptian castle, the Ptolemaic castles, and that was their way to put troops up there to keep eye on what was going on with the Seleucids. And so Antiochus the Great knew he needed to get them knocked out first, and that happened in 202 BC. And the force of the south will be powerless to resist, so he just starts marching towards the south. Even their best troops will not have the strength to stand. The invader will do as he pleases. No one will be able to stand against him. That's why he's called Antiochus the Great in history. He will establish himself in the beautiful land, which we know is Israel. So he makes Israel his home base to do fighting and wars down in the south, and will have power to destroy it. He will determine to come with the might of his entire kingdom, will make an alliance with the king of the south, and he will give him a daughter in marriage. Now, they're fighting and fighting for years, and so what Antiochus decides to do is make a peace treaty with Ptolemy Epiphanes, and the way he decides to do it is give his daughter in marriage. Have you ever heard of Cleopatra? Now, this is not the Cleopatra with Mark Antony yet. That was her her granddaughter, the Cleopatra III. This, though, is the first Cleopatra that was introduced to Egypt. And so she is sent down. She is about 13 years old, and she marries this 34-year-old king of Egypt. Now, but it says, but his plans will not succeed or help him. For those of you that know your history, the problem with Cleopatra I is she actually fell in love with her husband, Ptolemy Epiphanes. She let him know that the reason that she was sent down with a large entourage of men is those were not really slave helpers. They were part of army insurgents that were been sent by her father, and that they were going to try to find ways to open up the gates of the kingdom and overthrow Ptolemy. And so he's able to find out their plot. He kills all of them. And then Cleopatra convinces him to make a pact with Rome. Rome was now beginning to become a bigger player. Now remember, it's going to be the Romans that come in and conquer the Greek Empire. And so Ptolemy uses the Roman help. It says that, and because of that, Antiochus the Great realized he can't get his daughter to help him overthrow the king of Egypt. So he turns his attention to the coastlands. He decides he's going to go up to the nation of Greece and do what, of course, King Ahasuerus and others had tried to do, wipe out the Greeks. But a commander will put an end to his insolence and will turn his insolence back upon him, and that is the Romans. They stop him in his track and send him back home and tell him that he owes them tribute every single year. So Ptolemy Epiphanes make this agreement with Rome. Antiochus and Hannibal, you probably heard Hannibal and his great elephants and all. Antiochus was working with them to go up to conquer the Greeks, but the Romans defeated them. And Antiochus then was told he needed to pay thousands of talents of gold to the Roman Empire. And so you're going to see here, it says, after this he will turn back towards the fortresses of his own country. He goes back, but will stumble and fall to be seen no more. He actually starts raiding all the temples of the Seleucids and to get their gold to give to Rome, and he gets killed in the process of doing that. So that was in 187 BC, and then Seleucus Philopator was his son, who really, really loved his father. He was only about 15 years old when he came to the throne. His successor will send out a tax collector and maintain the royal splendor. So Seleucus Philopator says, instead of raiding the temples here, let's go get the money from Israel. So he sends a man to go get taxes from Israel. When the man gets there, he gets converted by the Jews. And instead of taking their money, he goes back, sets up a meeting with Seleucus Philopator, and assassinates him and kills him. So in a few years, however, he'll be destroyed, yet not in anger or in battle. He's just sitting down thinking that this guy is going to tell him how much gold he brought back from Israel, and he gets killed. But then the other son, and look what it says about him. He is Antiochus Epiphanes, which we've talked about before. This is the enemy of enemies of Israel even today. This was the worst of the worst of anyone. It says he will be succeeded by a contemptible person who has not been given the honor of royalty. Antiochus the Great, in order to not be killed by the Romans, when he did form this agreement, he promised he would pay him money, and he gave away some of his sons, and one of them that he gave away was Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was actually a Roman prisoner for a while, but what happened is Seleucus Philopator, because when he got killed, he wanted to appoint his son. His son was supposed to come into line. Antiochus Epiphanes convinced the Romans that if they sent him back, that he would pay even more money than Antiochus the Great's father would have paid if they let him go and rule. So that's how he did it, through intrigue. And as soon as he ends up getting in power, it says he will invade the kingdom when his people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. By this time, Ptolemy VI, who is now, he's only 12 years old, he's the grandson of Cleopatra. He's on the throne. She's really the monarch queen, beloved by the Egyptian people because how she protected them against her own father. Well, she's in charge. Well, Antiochus Epiphanes decides once she dies, and Cleopatra II is now married to Ptolemy, he attacks in 170 BC, thinking that they wouldn't be ready for an attack. Now, I'm going to pretty much stop right there for tonight, but I want to let you know that something happens. He ends up having a major victory at first, and so what he does is he has a reckoning to do. Because he begins to win against Ptolemy, everybody that sided with Ptolemy, which Israel, of course, was upset at all the taxes that the Seleucids, so they have been helping Ptolemy. So he has the high priest killed, and that's when he goes in and begins to go into Jerusalem and tear up the temple and end up blaspheming it. But we'll talk more about that next week. But what I would just want to close with on tonight to give you the emphasis is Daniel is thinking that his people are going to go back, build a temple, rebuild Jerusalem, go back to be in Israel of his dreams, and he's so excited that Cyrus allowed the people to go back exactly like Jeremiah said that he would. But when they stopped building the temple, he goes, well, wait a minute. I thought that all that was going to be great. God is kind enough to at least let him know, no. This is not the end. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars. And all I can say is that in our lifetime, I've had 4 presidents that I know have gotten up saying we're entering into a new world of peace. Your new thing. And let me tell you something. There are a lot of prophecies that have been fulfilled by detail. We've covered some of them. We haven't even gotten to some of the ones that still have not been fulfilled, that will be fulfilled before Jesus Christ comes back to the earth. So the encouraging thing I can tell you is this. Only God could have written these words. Only God could have given this revelation for it to be that accurate through all history. Even history people that do not believe in miracles, do not believe that whoever wrote Daniel chapter 11 was one of the best historians in ancient Greek history that ever wrote. But they have a hard time believing that it was written before it actually even happened. And so this is one of the great proofs that only God could have written the Bible, because the Dead Sea Scrolls proves that Daniel was written before a lot of these things were happening. And so there's no way that they can escape the obvious that God is the author of the Bible. Now we'll get into the rest of this stuff a little bit later, but hopefully now when you start going through and reading this stuff, I know you're not able to memorize everything I said, but you do have this video you can go back to. But the important thing is to see the King of the North is the Seleucid Empire. You can study that in history. The Ptolemaic Empire is the Egyptian Empire, and the wars going on. The reason God wanted Daniel to see this is to see the effect it's going to have on the Jewish people, because that's part of his judgment on them, because they constantly reject him, no matter how much he reaches out to them. And so that's the purpose of Daniel chapter 11. So God bless. We'll take up the rest of it next week. If you have any questions, wait till Jesus returns. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for your holy word. And we know there's some difficult things in here, but there's also some wonderful, miraculous things. And Lord, regardless if we know every detail, the main thing we know is you are the author of your holy word. And whatever you write is true. And one thing you've said is whoever puts their trust in you will never perish. That we can never be snatched from your hand. And so just as Cleopatra really existed, we know also Jesus really existed. And all of his promises are true. So be glorified, Lord, in your promises, and allow us, Lord, to trust in you and realize the future is all secure. You've got it all detailed out. You know exactly what will happen, and not a hair on our head, Lord, goes unnoticed by you, and it's a part of your perfect plan. So, Lord, we just pray that you will be with us, give us a supernatural peace and confidence and hope that Jesus will return just as you said, and will be victorious and will rule over this earth one day. And we know it'll happen. It's been written, it's been decreed, and you cannot do anything but succeed. And we give you praise for that in Jesus' name. Amen. God